Get Rich Education is brought to you by Norada Real Estate, Corporate Direct, and Mid-South Home Buyers.
Garrett Sutton here, Robert Kiyosaki's asset protection attorney and the author of Loopholes of Real Estate. As an American or foreign-based investor in U.S. real estate, you know we are a litigious society. You know that you need to protect your real estate and paper asset holdings with the right mix of LLCs and corporations. My firm, Corporate Direct, not only forms these entities, but importantly, we properly maintain them too. If you fail to follow the corporate formalities, you can lose it all in an instant. Corporate Direct is your source for LLC protection and maintenance in all 50 states. Visit corporatedirect.com or call 800-600-1760. Mention Get Rich Education for a free bonus. Switch your resident agent service to us and receive another bonus. It's all good. We look forward to assisting you at corporatedirect.com.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your affable host, Keith Weinhold, and this is episode 92, striking back for another wealth-building week. You are listening from one of 166 world nations that all converge right here every week through iTunes, iHeartRadio, Android, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and dozens of other platforms. Thanks for being here, but as always, you're not here for me, you're here for you. Today, we've got the pleasure of learning from such a skilled speaker. He is quite polished, speaking from the stage. He's on television a lot. He's in video a lot. And it's enjoyable to learn from someone like today's guest, whom is ultra concise, on point, and just plain accurate and well-researched. And he has been on TV a lot. And in fact, I'm going to consider this a tribute to his unvarnished honesty with all the facts to back it up. He was basically kicked off CNBC for telling it like it is about stocks. I totally respect that because except in rare circumstances, stocks don't create wealth. The belief that one will obtain wealth through long-term buy and hold stock investing is just plain being sold BS. It's replete BS, which stands for blue sky, by the way. You knew that, right? I mean, what else would BS stand for? Well, besides appearing on TV a lot, today's guest is also a contributor for Forbes and to entrepreneur.com. Today, he leads Wealth Factory, and I'll tell you more about Wealth Factory. He's probably going to rip 401k plans right along with me today and expose them for the total blue sky that they are. He's also going to help you find your investor DNA. Hey, thanks for all the comments about my monologue last week where there was no guest and it was just you and I. Some listeners say that monologues are their favorite here, which is just kind of hard for me to believe since recently we've had so many great guests on the show here, like Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Advisor Ken McElroy. We had Harry Dent on 2 weeks ago and another stellar guest today. I plan to do more monologue shows for you here in the future, of course. In the earlier days of GRE, late 2014 and early 2015, you'll find more of those monologues. But today, since we've got an extraordinary guest, let's meet him. Today, we're with one of, frankly, whom I think is one of the brightest financial minds I've really ever come across. He's the founder and chief wealth architect of Wealth Factory and New York Times bestselling author of the book, Killing Sacred Cows, Overcoming the Financial Myths That Are Destroying Your Prosperity. And he's personally helped countless people, especially business owners, create efficient wealth strategies that fit their unique strengths. Garrett is just a champion of finding spendable cash for you that you didn't even know you had without you having to work harder for it. So I want to give a big Get Rich Education welcome to Garrett Gunderson.
Hey, Keith. Thanks for having me, man. Look forward to this.
Hey, yeah, this sounds great. You and I are so aligned in mindset. I'm a Wealth Factory subscriber myself. So let's go back kind of near the beginning, Garrett. Where does this abundant mindset really spring from? Tell us about those formative years and how you grew into be an entrepreneur and such a brilliant financial strategist.
Well, I definitely learned a lot about scarcity growing up. I mean, I grew up in this small coal mining town, and my mom's side of the family were these Italian immigrants that still had the first dollar they ever earned kind of thing. I mean, they actually put money in coffee cans and had them in the cellar. And, my great aunt, my grandfather's sister, applied for welfare, and she had over $500,000 in the bank, not because they were high earners, they were just high savers. And the thing was, so much of their life was ruled by money. But fortunately, my grandfather, even though he was a coal miner, he had two side businesses. One was a TV repair shop, and the other one was he played accordion in a band, and they would travel all over on the weekends and do these gigs. So there was at least, some entrepreneurial spirit there. Obviously, they had to come over to America from Italy. That takes a bit of courage and, just a little bit of adventure to try to, achieve a better life. So I did have a little bit of that example, but really I didn't have any other entrepreneurial examples in my life for the most part. But fortunately, when I was 15, I started my first business with the support of my parents, especially my mom, because my dad worked at a coal mine. I actually started cleaning some of the vehicles that were surface vehicles when the bosses would come in. And my mom worked at a credit union, and I started cleaning the repossessed vehicles so he could turn around and sell them for more. And that was the launch of a very innovatively named Garrett Gunderson's Car Care. So I had that kind of like taste of having employees when I was a teenager. So even when I blew out my knee in basketball, I was still earning money by having other people detail cars during that time. I learned a little bit about marketing because I hired some of the people that had good connections in the community and brought cars in to be detailed. But that wasn't really kind of the life that I wanted or where I wanted to go, is just having a car detailing business. I ended up going to college and still made a little bit of money doing detailing of cars. And I even won the Young Entrepreneur of the Year, which came with like $5,000. And I wanted to.
Which must have felt like $1 million then.
Oh, dude, I thought I was rich the second they handed it to me. I'm like, I wonder who else made $5,000 this 1 second that I just got handed this check. And like I was looking at it, I was so excited about it. And I wanted to invest that money, Ben, because I want to be a millionaire. Because if I could be a millionaire, it meant that I could get out of Price, Utah. It meant that I wouldn't be, stuck with being a coal miner, or, I somehow would have felt more successful. So that was my initial kind of goal. Not saying it was the most noble goal. It was just one of the early ones, is I wanted to be a millionaire.
Because at that time, that was expansionary to you then.
Right. For where I was at the time, that was definitely a situation that at least motivated me, at least had me think a little bit bigger. Even though I think that if people just have money goals, they miss out on where they could really deliver the most value and the ways that they could truly, enjoy it along the way. Because if it's just about money and money alone, the minutia can get to you. And the vision a lot of times can feel smaller than the problems that we encounter. I think when the vision's bigger, you get better results, and vision is the greatest driver of value, and dollars follow value. So I think when we have a bigger vision than just being a millionaire, that there's a lot more that can come from that.
Yeah, you start to realize that becoming a millionaire, and millionaire is kind of a worn down term.
It doesn't mean that much anymore, does it?
Yeah, it doesn't mean that much anymore. Most people don't even realize that. And that alone is a mindset for some people. And then the other mindset, Garrett, is that, a millionaire, that money, that's really only the conduit to something else. That's nowhere near the end. In fact, that's closer to the beginning than the end. That's the conduit.
Yep. Yeah, I really feel like part of it was when I was in college and I was offered all these jobs in 1999, like Merrill Lynch and Strong Investments, which at the time was the number 2 performing fund family in the world, American Investment Bank. I mean, just a lot of these companies, Arthur Anderson, I mean, a lot of them are gone, got gobbled up, and I was just kind of being encouraged by my family members to go down that route because it was a good job, right? But we've seen, pensions are pretty much a relic of the past. People working for a company for 30 to 40 years, that just doesn't really exist in today's disruptive economy.
No.
And it isn't really the safe path. To me, the only safe path that people can have are really 2 things. Number one, you create economic independence, which is when you have enough investment income or entrepreneurial income to cover your basic expenses. All of a sudden, that gets you a degree of freedom and a degree of safety. Or number 2, you design a business around kind of your biggest insider advantage, around kind of your stupid human trick or your sole purpose, that thing that you can bring to the marketplace that has a huge value. And if you could do that, that's what really builds wealth. It's really got to be a combination of one of those two things, or really one of those things, because I'm telling you, people that just put their money away for the long haul by scrimping, saving, and sacrificing, and they go through this accumulation model of retirement plans, it is shown to be a massive failure rate. Yet there's enough commercials and there's enough information and there's enough people pitching it that there's still enough people buying into it, even though it's not going to get them where they want to go. And it's kind of a travesty. And what I see is most people get retirement. It's not a dream. It's actually a nightmare, because they're no longer in control of their outcomes, and they're really held captive to what interest rates are doing. If taxes go up, their lifestyle goes down, and inflation is just eroding their life year by year in retirement. And that's why I think a lot of people are miserable in retirement, even though they waited till that day to finally do the things they said they wanted to do, but then they got there and money started to control their lives. So it's really a bad system. It's completely broken, and it's time to retire that system and instead focus on cash flow and focus on things you have a lot more control over the outcomes.
Yeah, that's right. Oftentimes I joke, Garrett, whether someone owns their own business or whether they're an employee, people spend all this time learning about how their work works. They don't spend any time learning about how money works. And yet money is often the chief reason that they go to work. It doesn't make any sense.
That's a really good point, Keith. And the thing is, they just hand it over to so-called experts that are usually just disguised as salespeople, and they spend 90% of the time learning how to build a relationship and sell, and only 10% of the time knowing how markets really work and if they're really building a plan. And I think, most people that call themselves financial planners or financial advisors are merely mutual fund salesmen or maybe even life insurance salesmen. And I know, because that's how I started in finances. I started telling people I was a financial planner or a financial advisor. And at the same time, I was just peddling products. And I'll tell you what, in my first year or two, I wasn't like I was making sure they had the right car insurance, homeowners insurance, liability, disability, medical, or life. I wasn't making sure they had the right corporate structure. I wasn't analyzing how they can add mitigation and downside, protection to their investments. I wasn't looking at their credit score. I wasn't looking at their loan structures. I was simply asking them how much money they could set aside for the future and pushing a product. Now, fortunately, that was only a year or two that I did that nonsense, and I completely abandoned it and was labeled a fanatic, because I just saw pretty quickly when the market started going down in 2000 that people were exposed and that people really didn't have a financial plan, even though they had a so-called financial planner. And most financial planners, if I interview 1,000 of them, they can't even agree what a financial plan is.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Well, you and I are both in the financial education space. You're talking about a lot of myths out there. And I think one reason that you and I both enjoy being in the financial education space is because there are so many doggone myths out there. And debunking those myths really in a pretty direct way, once you debunk those for people, that translates into real, tangible value in their lives if they just know sooner.
Yeah, the myths are so subtle, they're not obvious. When it comes to myths, a lot of people think they would recognize them, but we recognize the obvious ones, like don't go put $100,000 on a credit card to fly private and then go to a party when you don't have a job. That's a pretty obvious thing to avoid. But, on the other hand, the subtle myths are things that really convince us that scarcity is real, that crowd out abundant thinking and has us not believe in investing in ourselves and really investing in things that make sense based upon who we are. Like the myths that are most prevalent is that diversification is key. Diversification is key if you have ignorance. Diversification never got anyone really wealthy other than people peddling that concept.
Right.
Focus is key. An example, like people that want to just dabble in real estate and then they dabble in stock trading and then they dabble in options and then they start dabbling in gas and oil, they're going to get their ass kicked. That's just flat out going to happen because they're going to go up against people who are really, truly getting educated. And if someone's really building a business around real estate and they're spending time in it every day, they're going to improve their knowledge around it, that they're watching things, they're going to events, they're looking in, analyzing deals, they're checking things out versus someone who just does it like that's got a full-time job and then just does this one little transaction they think is going to work out. That's usually where people get into trouble, is when they're not focused there and they're spread thin. And yet when we turn on the TV, and when I was on CNBC and they're promoting diversification, I got kicked off CNBC. I don't believe in that. And I didn't believe in the stock market. I think 90% of the average people putting money in the stock market should stop doing it immediately because they have no idea why the money's going to return, what the fees truly are, and what good it's really going to do them. And it doesn't promote and create cash flow now, which means they're going to be in bondage financially for even longer. And even worse, they worked hard to save that money and they turn around and lose it in the stock market. I just think it's a crazy, crazy system.
It is a crazy, crazy system. And you covered some of it in your mega popular best-selling book, Killing Sacred Cows, back in 2008. And I think one of the myths out there is somehow people think that the stock market is going to make them wealthy. But, you know, Garrett, I had devoted an entire episode months ago where I just did a monologue on the fact that your real rate of return from the stock market is often zero, even when the stock market rises at historic norms, when it's inflation adjusted,
Yep.
when it's fee adjusted, when it's emotion adjusted, and the taxes you have to factor in, because often you're still paying taxes, even in a tax advantage plan.
You're being friendly saying zero, right?
Yeah, I actually did mention that in the show. It might be less than zero.
Yeah, well, and we did the research. I have two guys on my team, Tom and Steven, that both researched this. And from 2000 to 2015, the stock market did 8.7% adjusted for inflation. Now, we're told that it's supposed to do that every year. That's what it did total.
That's total over a 15-year period.
Yeah.
That's about 0.5% per year.
I mean, and you had your money at risk. And, you know, it's just insane because if we look, almost anyone out there has a higher interest rate on a loan than what they just got returned for 15 years in the stock market. At least if they paid off the loan, it would have been a guaranteed return. And I'm not even saying that that's the right thing to do. But, you know, I think that what is really missing from a lot of people's financial plan is understanding their own cost of money. And so cost of money is something that most financial people don't want to teach or don't think about, but it's always looked at in corporate finance. In corporate finance, they call it maybe a hurdle rate sometimes, but cost of money is your highest net best rate of return or your highest net cost on the money that you have out there from a loan standpoint. So if I have a 17.9% American Express, anytime I spend $1, it's not just $1, it's $1 plus 17.9% that's costing me.
Right.
If I can earn 7% on my money, it's not just $1, you know, when I spend something, it's $1 plus the 7% that I could have earned. So if we understand our cost of money, then it's easier to navigate and make financial decisions like, should I pay off this loan or shouldn't I pay off this loan? Should I invest in this investment or not invest in this investment? You know, and that's why a lot of TV pundits will say, you always need to do this, like a tactic. But the thing is, each person's different and cost of money is critical. So, I mean, Keith, if I were willing to lend you money, how much money would you like to take?
Well, it depends on the interest rate, but I think I'm a pretty good investor.
Let's say it's 0%.
All that you'll give me.
Yeah, and how fast do you want to pay me back?
I want to stretch that out as long as you'll possibly give me.
Right. Now, you said something, and I kind of cut you off. You said, I would take quite a bit not knowing the interest rate, but I'm a good investor.
Right.
See, you're saying you have a pretty high cost of money. So even if I went to 1%, does your answer change?
No.
Yeah, because you know you can out earn 1%. So like that's the nice test is go and say, you know, if someone's willing to lend you money and, you know, at what interest rate would you stop borrowing? Well, that's going to be a good indicator of what your cost of money is, for one. And it's a good idea of what your peace of mind index is. Because I might be able to certainly earn 7%, but maybe when someone starts charging me 6%, I start taking different consideration because I start thinking about how guaranteed it is and the level of risk that I take. Where I saw people that were pulling out equity of their homes in the year 2006 and 2007 and investing in the stock market because they were talking about the stock market should be doing at least 10% every year and you could borrow money really cheap at 4%. But the problem was the stock market didn't perform. So that was a really bad strategy because it took non-risky money and put it in a risky place. But at the same time, if I could take money and allocate it somewhere where it has the same or less risk even and improve my cash flow, that's how you can become more resourceful and have different set of financial eyes that sees opportunity where most people are really stagnant. And Keith, here's kind of why that happens is financial advising and retirement planning. I know, man, I really am saying that word a lot, but I know that's where a lot of us get a ton of information.
Yeah, and those are bad words.
Yeah, they only focus on the balance sheet.
Right.
And the balance sheet doesn't measure cash flow at all. All the balance sheet does is help you understand your net worth, your assets versus your liabilities. So either your debt or your equity. And so they teach us to accumulate and build more and more net worth. And I've even read financial authors that I usually like saying net worth is the ultimate measure of wealth. Net worth is not at all. Cash flow is health. It lets us know our financial health when we have healthy cash flows. So financial planning lulls us to sleep, building a balance sheet. And then when we get to retirement, we're supposed to become income statement experts, even though we neglected it our entire life. That would be like saying, I want to do an Ironman triathlon, but I'm not going to train. And then you just show up one day to do the triathlon and, you're probably not going to make it. It's probably going to be pretty tough. And if you're like me, when I didn't know how to swim, you might not make it at all. So I think it's crazy to only focus on net worth, that I would use cash flow as a healthy indicator much before I would use net worth. And it's not an either or. It's just that you can't neglect one in the name of the other. It's really how can you get both of them? Because if your balance sheet, if you use it effectively, those assets are going to produce cash flow instead of accumulate. That's income. And you manage your liabilities so that your expenses are the right types of expenses. And Keith, there's more than one type of expense. There's 4 types. There's destructive ones that everyone should eliminate, but there's also lifestyle ones, which we enjoy. Just make sure you pay cash for lifestyle expenses. There's protective expenses, which are things that transfer risk and help people have more sustainable wealth. And the wealthy always have protective expenses handled. And most middle class neglect this, and that's why they get financially devastated at least a couple times during their lifetime. And then the 4th type of expense is a productive expense. It's a dollar that goes to pay for something, and more than $1 in income comes from that. Employees might be that for a business owner. Marketing might be that for a business owner. A mortgage might be that for a real estate investor. I mean, yes, it's an expense, but because that exists, you now have access to an asset. So I really think the game is, how do you capitalize your assets to create more cash flow? And how do you manage your liabilities to be the right types of expenses in the right framework or structure so that they're efficient? And so, yeah, that sums it up a little bit right there.
Yeah, and we often talk about the ability to reliably turn equity into cash flow. That's a popular investor mantra, and you actually living a better life rather than deferring. And there's so much to touch on there that you mentioned, Garrett. I've made the point that really, at least in theory, if not in total practice, one's net worth could be zero as long as their cash flow is enough to support their lifestyle, and that cash flow source is a durable income stream. I often like to say, Garrett, people really need to unlearn before they can get ready to learn. They need to unlearn before that they can get ready to learn. I mean, people basically make a 30-year or so bet that the stock market will save them before they even understand investing at all. And, we've talked about it since 2000. The stock market on an inflation-adjusted basis hasn't made any gains. And in fact, it's probably down, and meanwhile, the financial institutions, they've kind of wisely and deliberately transferred their risk to what they call investors, which are the masses.
It's a system issue. It's a philosophy issue. I mean, you can have really hard work with a bad philosophy and get horrible results. It's just and there's a lot of people out there working hard for their money, like you said. But then when it comes to having their money work for them, there's a lot of bad information and reliance on things that aren't very sustainable and that don't really work. And then it becomes pretty devastating. That's where a lot of scarcity comes in. Someone spends all this time working really hard, and then, England leaves the European Union and the market starts to go down dramatically. They had no control over that, yet it starts to impact their mindset. It starts to have them feel a little bit defeated. It has them start to be concerned. Now they show up differently the next day with a little bit more stress, a little bit less healthy, and a lot more frustration. And I'm like, why put your money at risk if you don't really know how it's going to work? I think it's okay to be in cash until you get really clear where's a good place to invest. I mean, people that buy a lot of real estate, they buy it during times when everybody else is strapped, when everybody else is struggling.
Right.
Because they build liquidity. And I think retirement planning underemphasizes liquidity and overemphasizes retirement. It's all about putting money into something that's locked away till at least 59 and a half versus saying, hey, you shouldn't even put $1 into a plan like that until you've got at least some good liquidity, at least 6 months. But heck, I'd like to have a lot more than that, because I don't just want it to be an emergency fund. I want it to be more of a peace of mind fund, but I want it more than that to be an opportunity fund. I want cash on hand, so when the right opportunity comes my way, I can actually capitalize on it. I can actually do something about that opportunity.
People say work smarter, not harder, but oftentimes the same person that says that has their head down deep, buried so much in their work that they haven't looked around enough to take that 30,000-foot view and figure out some of these things. Well, when Garrett and I come back, we're going to touch on your investor DNA. Just what is your investor DNA? And we're going to talk about some more of the flaws in the 401k plan. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Wealth Factory's Garrett Gunderson. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Cash flow real estate investors nationwide and worldwide, this is Get Rich Education's Keith Weinhold. Forbes has rated Memphis, Tennessee as the #1 cash flowing market in the world. Our good friends at Mid-South Homebuyers have been Memphis's premier turnkey real estate provider for 14 years with a stellar reputation and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Owner Terry Kerr was born and raised in Memphis. Yeah, he knows the market and has renovated and sold over 1,000 houses in the Memphis area. Find out what their many repeat buyers already know. Their houses are completely renovated, even come with a 1-year builder's warranty and a lifelong rental guarantee. They're a perfect fit for the first-time out-of-state investor or the seasoned investor diversifying their portfolio. Mid-South Homebuyers' friendly staff makes investing easy. Learn more at midsouthhomebuyers.com or give them a call at 901-217-HOME.
Are you looking for a roadmap to financial freedom? If so, we have a solution for you. Norada Real Estate is offering a limited number of free strategy sessions to help you get out of the rat race. Learn how you can create wealth and build monthly passive income. To set up a time with one of our knowledgeable investment counselors, simply go to noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA realestate.com.
This is Rich Dad, Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. And the reason I respect Keith, he's a very strong, smart, bright young man.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education with our guest, Wealth Factory's Garrett Gunderson, wealthfactory.com. Garrett, you have this great sort of concept or notion, and I've never heard anyone articulate it or describe it at all before, and that's what's called an investor can often be successful if they cater things toward their specific strengths, and that's called tapping into your investor DNA. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so my kind of tagline to that is risk isn't in the investment. Risk is in the investor.
Right.
So is it a risky investment? Depends on who's investing in it, what they know about it. What is their core competencies? What is their core values? What are their core drivers combined with where they're putting their focus? I know that technology for me is a risky investment simply because I'm not keeping up with trends there. I'm not a trendsetter in it. I utilize it once it's functional, and I don't really know what's coming next. Because it's not like I live in Silicon Valley, A. B, I'm not reading tech magazines all the time and testing things out and trying things out and hanging out with high schoolers that see what's going on with all that kind of stuff. Yet there's a lot of people, that gave Warren Buffett a really hard time in the 90s because he wouldn't invest in the .com world, and he didn't because he said, I just don't understand it. And he stayed away from it because it wasn't part of his investor DNA.
Sure. It's all a means of knowing what you do know and knowing what you don't know.
Exactly. And so what's nice about knowing your investor DNA is, number one, is it saves you time. It saves you time from looking into things that don't make sense based upon who you are. The things that you find you would procrastinate anyway because it seems like drudgery. It doesn't seem exciting at all. So it's like, rather than subject yourself to that, you don't have to spend time on that anymore. Number two, you can refine your skills in the areas that you are actually going to invest so that you have some degree of knowledge. And your own mindset and your own, brain can be active in saying, is this the right time to be in or to be out? I think the craziest notion is when investment people say, hey, you always want to be investing because the market goes up, the market goes down, but it always goes up. So sometimes you're buying cheap, sometimes you're not, but you want, it's like, I hate that concept because when it's not working, to add more money to it doesn't make sense. When you have an investor DNA figured out, you can actually have some intelligence with your money and you become a better investor.
Yeah, very well stated. It's knowing you and then acting upon that. And, sometimes it's not a means of just staying within your comfort zone. I like to tell people sometimes it's about expanding your comfort zone.
It's nice when people truly focus instead of dabble. If we look at Andrew Carnegie, he said, I put all my eggs in one basket and watch it like a hawk. That's the road to wealth, really. So it doesn't mean that if I'm a real estate investor, I only buy one piece of real estate or even one type of real estate. It just means if that's what I'm going to get really extraordinary at, why not just focus there? Why not just do the very best I can in that arena versus going out and getting involved in oil and gas if I don't know much about it? Because see, a lot of people get involved in oil and gas, don't know a lot about it, but they get enticed because there's a tax benefit to it. And they let the tax tail wag the dog. But I never spend $1 just to save 40 cents. And I never let taxes be my number one reason why I do something. I want it to be a secondary reason at best.
Yeah, people that say that really get it. We have Rich Dad advisor Tom Wheelwright. He's been on the show 3 times now, very sharp mind. Even Tom Wheelwright himself, the Rich Dad tax advisor, says, don't let the tax tail wag the dog. I have ultimate respect for somebody that's going to say that, especially someone being in his position. Well, when it comes to investor DNA and developing who you are and expanding your comfort zone, we are investors. Oftentimes one needs to come up with a liquidity ball that we need to employ into something. But a lot of people approach building up that liquidity the wrong way, I think sometimes because they're using the wrong words, which reinforces the wrong mindset. And one of those words is a budget. And budget is a word I really dislike. I try not to use words like budget and savings. Instead, I like a word like liquidity. Tell us a little bit about budget. I know you don't like that word either.
Yeah, I have a book coming out called Budgeting Sucks.
Awesome.
Here's the problem with the word budget is it gets people to think small-minded. It gets them to think they can shrink their way to wealth, which just isn't true. And they use a lot of their mental energy thinking about where they can save instead of using that mental energy thinking how they could earn. And so that kind of constraining mindset leads to less profitability and less value creation. I mean, there's only so much time in a day. So if someone's spending their time researching ways to save $1 here and $1 there, they're not researching ways to enhance their skills. And the other problem with budgeting is it's a lot like a diet. You just really can start missing out on a lot of enjoyable things in life. I mean, it just seems like a whole bunch of problem to say, okay, I can spend X amount this month, X amount, and like you just put envelopes together or jars or all these different things. Well, what if it's just a month where there's a lot of great stuff happening or more than one wedding and it's not in your budget for gifts or all this kind of stuff? I'm saying all you have to do to solve the budget problem is pay yourself first. You pay yourself first into a separate account than your checking or into your business checking, and then that becomes a wealth capture account that then you allocate towards growth of your wealth and towards investing. And as long as you take it off the top and then just stay in bounds with the rest of your money, there's no more necessity to budget. Budgeting is only needed when someone is a train wreck and off track. And you know what? That's the time to go listen to Dave Ramsey. If you are absolutely going into debt every month and you are just a train wreck, Dave will help you get there. He'll leave you in scarcity in the end, but he'll get you on track, and he's probably the best at doing it. But I'm here to tell you, if you are earning money and you're doing okay, but you keep finding yourself spending more than you should or feeling guilty for not budgeting more, just pay yourself first and it will solve the problem.
Yeah, you touched on something I just need to comment on. Dave Ramsey, and I'm not here to criticize or critique him. We just do 2 different things, Dave Ramsey and Get Rich Education. Dave Ramsey tells people how to avoid being poor and to get into a middle class trench, okay? At Get Rich Education, we tell middle class or poor people how they can become wealthy, and it really doesn't take any more effort. It's more of a shift in mindset. Invest in yourself first and pay yourself first.
That's the game. If people did that, and I get some people don't invest in themselves because it's like, what if I make a mistake? Well, guess what? You will. I've made a lot of mistakes over my life, but you learn from them and you course correct. The bigger mistake is not to do anything at all, rely on and trust on other so-called experts and miss out on learning the lessons along the way because you'll have less financial IQ. You'll have less money in the end too because you tried to avoid those things. I mean, I wrote Killing Sacred Cows. It was almost like a confessional. Like, hey, people are like, you're pretty young. How do you know this stuff? I'm like, making mistakes and asking what I could have done different, what would have helped if I would have known beforehand. And instead of trying to justify what I did and extrapolate that out of like, oh, well, if the market would have been different or whatever, or, like a lot of retirement people say they have 30 years experience or however long they've been in the business. They have 1 year's experience for 30 times over. They're just justifying things. I admitted to my mistakes, confessed, and then said, here's what I would have done different. Here's a tool to avoid having that happen yet again. And I got to tell you, that's where I think that, a lot of the successes come from is it's relatable when people admit to their mistakes. There's no one out there that hasn't made a business mistake or a financial mistake at some time. And if you learn the lessons, you become more powerful. If you justify it away, then you become held captive to the myth and you actually become someone that's out there perpetuating it, which I really despise.
Well, we're talking about mistakes and myths an awful lot here. And maybe the number one mistake that most Americans are making is they're funneling and they're diverting too much of their income off into a 401k plan. I've kind of called 401k plans is not a tax deferral plan first. It is a life deferral plan before it's a tax deferral plan, because you're just deferring and you're settling until later, and you might not really ever be gratified when you do that. Now, in your books and on your website and such, I know you've got a lot of kind of very tactical flaws in 401ks, and a lot of people just don't realize what all of the fees and what all the costs in a 401k are. Why don't you break down some of those numbers-wise for us?
Yeah, and what I like is John Oliver on HBO just did a special on this. Tony Robbins' book, Money, really kind of addressed a lot of the problems in 401ks with fees as well. The only thing is, like with John Oliver, who's not a financial guy, he addresses the problem and gives a one step in the right direction in the solution, not the full step, right? So instead of saying, 401ks have 12B1 fees, which are marketing fees that you pay for. They have admin fees, legal fees. They've got the expense ratios on the funds that are underlying. I mean, 60 Minutes did an exposure on this saying that there was up to 13 fees in some of these plans. And it was just the last few years where it actually became legislated that they had to be disclosed. They weren't disclosing all the fees when these programs were built. And because they feel pretty complicated, then a lot of the public, it was hard for them to understand what was going on. But there was a firm in Seattle that what happened was they were tracking not just their deposits, because, a lot of people see their 401ks go up when they make a deposit, but they were looking at the real rates of return. And it was during a time the market was going up and they were still not making money. Well, there was 13.3% worth of fees inside of the plan.
Wow.
And so that kind of started and was the catalyst behind all of this. There are plans where you can get lower fees, but it doesn't mean the plan isn't still problematic. My first problem with the plan is it's 100% government controlled, so the government can change the rules. The second thing I have with the plan is you don't own the plan. Since the government does, you're a beneficiary. It says FBO, for benefit of. So they own the plan. You're the beneficiary of the plan. Number three is it doesn't actually save taxes. I mean, when I ask Keith, every time I speak, who thinks taxes are going up? Everyone raises their hand. Who thinks taxes are going down? One time I've had someone raise that taxes were going down.
Can't believe that even happened.
It was a CPA, by the way, which was just even better.
I'm not hiring him.
Yeah, I was like, okay, cool. That's because he's trying to live off the justification of deferring income. But deferral doesn't mean saving. And the only reason you pay less tax when you contribute to a 401k is because you didn't have constructive receipt of that money as a true earnings. The government kept hold of that money inside of the plan. So yes, you paid less tax, but the tax savings don't end up in your pocket. They're trapped inside of a plan that if you want that money back, you're already at a 10% disadvantage than if you had just paid the taxes up front. How crazy is that? Then, I mean, we could go through a number of things like the underlying investments, typically being really poor mutual funds that haven't performed. We've talked about the market heavily on this, but my biggest issue is there's no cash flow to this plan. So how are you going to achieve economic independence? And what it does is it lulls people to sleep so that they don't know whether it's really working or not until it's too late. When they get to retirement, if this was their big plan, it's underfunded and it's not doing a good job. Because if I went back to 1980 and I asked people, hey, what would be a good amount of money to have in a retirement plan? What do you think they'd say, Keith, in 1980?
$1 million.
That would be the high end, right? That's the high end. People going like, I'm thinking big. This would be huge. $1 million. Some people might say $250,000 or $500,000. Actually, the majority would, but the people that really had a bigger thought process would say $1 million. And now when we look at it, that's grossly inadequate. $1 million with today's interest rates, well, how much income does that provide? It provides less than almost a minimum wage job does. It's insane how bad this planning is and how much false hope it provides. You know, the only people that are really succeeding on this are the institutions, because I just want to dissect this a little bit further. So check this out. If you're a financial institution, what do you want from people?
Income, a commission.
So you want money. How often?
As often as I can possibly get it.
How long do you want to hold on to their money for if you're a financial institution?
I want to stretch that out as long as possible too.
And how much do you want to give them back when they ask for a withdrawal?
As little as they possibly want to get out.
There's never been a better program for the financial institutions than a 401k, because check it out. If you set up a 401k as an employer, you have to let your 401k administrator know you don't want your employees automatically opted in. Otherwise, every time you have an employee, it already automatically comes out of their paycheck. They'd have to say they don't want it. Otherwise, it's already assumed that they're going to contribute, and they start taking it. So not only are they getting your money, and at every paycheck, they get the government's money, and the institution gets to charge a fee on your money and the government's money that's inside of the plan. So they just found a way to increase their fees. And if you want your money out early, there's a penalty. So they found a way for you to keep your money in there longer. And what does retirement planning say? Build a nest egg and live off the interest. Well, that's the best way that they can hold on to the most of your money and give you back the least possible. So 401ks follow the 4 rules of the institution. The game is rigged against you, and you're doing the exact opposite. A financial institution would never put their financials and go, we're going to take a bunch of money and put it in a retirement plan with the depositors in our bank. No, because they would run out of cash flow and the business would die and it would be a risky venture, yet they're trying to sell that to the rest of the American public. It's insane. And the thing is, just one more thing on these institutions, because if people thought more like a bank, I mean, banks really, when they're following their rules, are ultra successful. Number one, if you want to go get a piece of real estate, what's the first thing the bank wants to know?
What's your income?
Yep. They want to know your income. Why? They want to know, can you afford this? And okay, so if you have a good income, what's the next thing they want to know?
They're probably going to take a look at your net worth statement.
Yep. So once they look at your kind of your cash flow and they look at your collateral, right, on the personal level, when they're looking at that net worth statement, what's the third C that they're probably going to go for?
What's your credit?
What's your credit, right? To see what is the risk. So they're looking at your credit, your cash flow, and your collateral. Then when they're looking at the collateral as far as what you're buying, they force you to get an appraisal. That's to protect them, and they make you pay for it. And then if you don't give them enough deposit or down payment, they're going to charge you PMI so that they're insuring their cash. Now, here's the deal. If they're lending you money, when we look at what CDs are paying now, or money markets or savings accounts, they're paying like 1%. If they're turning around and giving you a great interest rate, like 3%, that's not a 2% return for them. That's a 200% return, because they paid you $1 and they made $3. And any grocery store or any retail store that buys something for $1 and sells it for $3, that's a 200% markup. That is a great margin. That is a great rate of return. They're managing their risk and they're getting astronomical returns. And to boot, they're charging you fees to even let you put money with them for them to rent it out. It is an insane model. And yet, what is everybody else doing? They're putting their money in a 401k. The institutions don't even care how much you have in a 401k when they go to lend to you, because they don't really consider it your money. At best, they know it's 50% your money. And if it's in the stock market, they know that they don't have any control over that outcome. That's why they like to see money in a savings account or money in something really stable and liquid. So I just think that if we could unveil, the rules are usually rigged against us. And instead, if you understand them, you can rig the game in your favor. Even though you utilize these institutions, you're not being used by them.
Yeah, I mean, if investors, when they got their quarterly 401k statement or however often they get it, I don't participate in a plan like that. I wouldn't do that. If they got that statement and it showed them their returns after it was adjusted for inflation, after it was adjusted for the 13 types of fees that you mentioned, and maybe even putting a factor in there for the emotional component of buying and selling at the wrong time, then perhaps no one would invest in 401ks. But my number one comment about 401ks, and you touched on it earlier, Garrett, is just one 3-word sentence when I hear someone talk about a 401k, and that is, where's your income? It's not there. There's never any answer for that question.
Yep.
So, Garrett, as we're kind of winding down here, anything else the Get Rich Education listeners should know when it comes to abundance mindset and turning equity into cash flow?
I find that people tend to be and think a lot more abundantly when they have enough cash flow coming in, whether they show up to a job or, that they don't have to manage every single day. They still have to monitor it. They still have to be, responsible for it. But if it covers their expenses and they have the economic independence, abundance is a little bit easier to swallow at that point. It's a little bit easier to focus on. When they don't have their finances in order, scarcity tends to trickle in. It tends to be a companion in their life a little bit more. And so money is a lot like air. When there's a lot of it, it feels pretty abundant. When it's not a lot, it feels pretty scarce. So even though I believe scarcity is just a state of mind, not a state of being, I really think it's important for people to embrace, are they using sound financial principles, and have they figured out their investor DNA? And if they haven't, then they're going to be more likely to fall prey and be a victim to scarcity. But the cool thing is, it doesn't matter where you're at right now. It just means, are you willing to take a step in the right direction? Start investing in yourself. Start paying yourself first. And when you get into scarcity, I just recommend you do one of two things. Call up someone that is a mentor and let them know that you're in scarcity so they can ask you questions that you can't ask of yourself when you're highly emotional and help you get through it. Or two, just help someone else out. Rather than tell them why you're in scarcity or get them bought into the story, find people you can go out there and deliver value for. And whether they write you a check or not, just the act of creating value for someone and helping someone out, it's really hard to be scarce during those moments. So I know that's not a direct financial piece, but it will lead to a lot better financial life.
Well, Garrett, you've really just detonated knowledge dynamite all over the place for us today. It's been great having you on. And you know, Get Rich Education listeners, Garrett Gunderson isn't so much real estate-ish as we often are on this show. But like I've said, oftentimes one is best served if they can unlearn what they believe to already be true faster so that they can learn over here on the abundance side faster. And that's a lot easier to do when you've unlearned scarcity, when you've unlearned things like you thought a 401k was a good thing to invest in. Garrett, how can Get Rich Education find out more about you and Wealth Factory?
The best thing to do is go to wealthfactory.com or go to wealthfactory.com/WF as in Wealth Factory Resources. wealthfactory.com/WF Resources. You want to be a better investor? We have an investment scorecard that helps you determine if an investment's aligned with your investor DNA. You want to know how to optimize your cash flow? We got a cool cash flow guide there. We've got some articles I've done in Forbes on saving tax. I mean, we just have some really cool resources, and that you don't have to buy them or anything. We're just gifting them to build a relationship and deliver some value.
Yeah, and wealthfactory.com is packed with value. And by the way, I don't have any sort of business relationship with Garrett or Wealth Factory at all. I've just been a subscriber for a while myself, and the articles and the columns and the videos over there are so content rich and well written, and they're also really well formatted and just a pleasure to read. So Garrett Gunderson, thank you so much for coming on to Get Rich Education today.
Hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And I just think that it's good to hear someone that's so aligned with expanding your means and cash flow investing and out there teaching it. I think that this is the message the world needs to hear if they want to have some real financial success and get rid of the old system that is absolutely broken. And I think this is heavy, but it's ruining people's lives on the other side, and you're really helping people out. So thanks, Keith.
Yeah, I think when some people learn about Garrett Gunderson, the first question they ask themselves is, how didn't I know about him sooner? I like how Garrett put it when he and I were chatting off microphone one time, saying that people live more fulfilling lives when they focus on production, not reduction. There are two great online resources for you to know about. One is wealthfactory.com for tactical, strategic wealth building info. And the second one, which is more real estate investing centric, is that it is a must to subscribe to our free newsletter at getricheducation.com. So, cash flow statements over budgets, thriving over surviving, production over reduction, and of course, abundance over scarcity. I'll be back with you next week. Though you might quit your day job, don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.